Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us as we continue to celebrate Women's History Month with today's hybrid program, History at High Noon. Listen to how she changed the world. We ask that you please silence your smart devices and type any questions that you have for our guest speakers into the chat function located at the bottom center of your screen. Or if you're joining us in person, hold your questions until the end. We'll have a short Q&A after the program. Excuse me. It's my honor to introduce and welcome our speakers today. John Horan is the oral historian at the State Archives of North Carolina, and Annabeth Poe is the oral history assistant. So please join me in welcoming them. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so we are nearing the end of Women's History Month, but what this project shows is that women's history is not limited to March. It's not limited to fighting for suffrage and the 19th Amendment. It's not just encapsulated in the feminist movements of the 1960s or Title IX in 1972. Instead, it encompasses all of these things and more. Women's history is alive. It's constantly being written and reshaped in the world around us, and that's evident when listening to the stories from some of North Carolina's notable women who shared their experiences with us, and now we get to share those experiences with you. For as we'll see, she changed the world. First, let's introduce ourselves a little bit more. My name is John Horan, and I am the oral historian for the State Archives. And I'm also the podcaster for the State Archives. So I'm going to do a shameless plug because why not? It's called Connecting the Docs, like documents, but dots. It's a nice little pun. So listen to that. We just concluded our fourth season where we highlighted disaster preparedness in the state, the year of the trail, and a rediscovered letter from a dying woman to a Revolutionary War general. Still, as I said, shameless plug aside, I am the oral historian. And as the oral historian, I am responsible for gathering and preserving the story of North Carolina as told by North Carolinians with their own voices. I collect oral histories for projects that I create in conjunction with the Special Collections team and the state archivist. This is one such project, She Changed the World Oral History Project. But I also collect oral histories from community partners where I may be a consultant or just the conduit into the repository. So if you are in that camp, we can talk about that in the Q&A, or you can get with me after this program and we can talk about how to preserve your oral histories in the state archives.
So hi, I'm Annabeth Poe. I'm the assistant oral historian at the State Archives. I'm fairly new to the position and to the program, having graduated with my master's degree in December in public history. I'm interested in the way in which different forms of media can be used to convey important historical stories, something that I now have the opportunity to do, working with the oral history collection, and when I worked as an intern with the podcast that John mentioned, which you should definitely go listen to. I'm excited to be here today and talk to you about these wonderful women.
All right, so the oral history program is relatively new given the scheme of things. The unit was founded in 2019 with the She Changed the World Oral History Project, which, by the way, is still collecting. We just did another interview in August of 2023. And since 2019, though, we've added several other collecting efforts, including a project on COVID-19 and the impact that had on state employees. And we're currently in the midst of collecting for a school integration and desegregation oral history project. And then we have another project which we are doing with the American Indian Heritage Commission. And so I'm happy to discuss about any of the work we're doing in the oral history unit at the end. But today we want to focus on She Changed the World. First, we're going to point out exactly what we learned about the art of oral history by conducting this project. Got a few key points to highlight about this project that helped form the beginnings of a great oral history program. And we talk about the nuts and bolts of that. We'll get into the project itself, sharing highlights, analysis, and the voices of our narrators. That last point is particularly important. I wanted to say we wanted to limit our voices in this presentation, and we wanted the women who are the subject of the project to be to relate their stories as much as possible.
Yeah, and we learned a lot from conducting this oral history project because it was the archive's first one. This project not only taught us a lot about the narrators and about their stories, but also provided a great deal in understanding of what we call meta understanding. In other words, we learned about how to create oral histories in addition to learning from the content of those histories. The establishment of this project has shown us a great deal about many women who had a hand in shaping North Carolina, but it also provided a basis for establishing the oral history program. Having this tangible project run simultaneously with the initial organization of the oral history unit meant that the theoretical idea of conducting oral histories was realized with a robust, tangible project. Since this project was part of a larger effort to recognize women and the influence of women in the state's history with a specific deadline, She Changed the World could have been called She Created an Oral History Program. By utilizing this type of project as part of a larger showcase, guidelines and protocols needed to be created and honed rapidly. I'm happy to say that this project occurred with great success. Through the pressure cooker of She Changed the World, the oral history unit established benchmarks and created baselines. This included the development of transcription guidelines, information about the best way to collect and accession new and different styles of projects, and support for the creation and maintenance of a robust internship program that I was a part of. It also provided excellent stories for a series of blogs on the State Archives blog, which is called History for All the People.
That's another plug, by the way. All right. So what we learned from the project. So the mission statement is here on the screen, and I'll read it out loud here. The unit's initial project will feature North Carolina women, past and present, who have achieved amazing things in multiple disciplines to help make the world a better place. The project is one component of the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources She Changed the World North Carolina Women Breaking Barriers campaign, which ran through November 2020. There's information on that. I've got a link if you'd like that. But we also sought to interact with women across a wide range of professions to learn what we could. And we'd like to share a little bit more about those findings with you.
The interviews were broken down by category, which you can see here on the screen. And all 7 of these categories are represented in the collection. Each of the women who were interviewed as part of this project is a trailblazer and has pioneered in her field. She's either done something that hadn't been done before and was the first, or she built on what came before and opened new doors for others. What this project and these oral histories did and continue to do is put a contemporary focus on the larger history of women within the state. The story showed the positive impacts women are having on the state, which is not just in the distant past, but today. These women represent a sort of living history that measures how far we've come and still underscores how much more we've got to do.
So education is a passionate subject to just about all of the women mentioned. Banu Valadares discusses working on teaching kids using alternative methods. She shows that art can be instructive and effective style for reaching kids. Shasta Hamilton also highlights alternative methods of teaching through her collaborative dance studio. She emphasizes that working with others in dance is a stark contrast to the competitive model traditionally used. Meanwhile, listen as Dr. Lindsay Zano brings the discussion to science, technology, engineering, and math, otherwise known as STEM. As a working paleontologist and professor, Zano relates stories about teaching the value of data.
There's a passion in our culture for paleontology, and so it often feels more like an art than a science, or a cultural icon than scientific data. And the truth is that, we're human beings living on a dynamic planet, and we have challenges, and that planet is alive and it's changing. And we have questions about how to survive and what's the best approach, what's sustainability, what, out of all the things we could do to preserve our world and make it safe for us to live on, what are the things that we should do? And we can't protect every organism that's alive on this planet right now in the face of extinction. Who should we protect? And we need all of this data to make informed questions, even about human health. Diseases evolve. We know that. We know most people understand antibiotic resistance and how organisms are adapting and changing. Paleontology is the longest running natural experiment on Earth. It's over 4 billion years of life responding to global change. So it's our real data to be able to answer these questions of how evolution works and how life has got to be the way it is, how life responds to climate changes, both slow changes and quick changes in the face of mass extinction. And if we can just discover this data, understand what it means, and use it in a predictive framework, then we've got real world data for the way things have been to help us understand the way things are going to be and how we can affect change that's positive for us.
So in addition to STEM education and using new learning techniques, many of the women discuss the importance of multiculturalism in the classroom. Dr. Norma Sermon Boyd from Kannapolis, North Carolina, served as an educator during the 60s and beyond. She remembers her career during school integration.
I arrived on Sunday and I interviewed in Spotsylvania County that Monday and was hired on the spot. And that was a very interesting transition, not what I was anticipating, because the job offer was at the Black High School. I interviewed with the superintendent and the principal. And when we completed the interview, when we were headed back to the central office, the superintendent's name was Bill. Mr. Bill said to me, "How would you feel about interviewing at Spotsylvania High School," which was the white high school? And my response to him was, "I would be fine. I'm going to teach minds, not color." And he says, "Well, there are no Black teachers at that high school right now. Would that bother you?" And I said the same thing. And so I did interview for the position at Spotsylvania High School. And when I received my letter of invitation to employment, it was for employment of math as a math teacher at Spotsylvania High School. And I knew then that I would be the only Black teacher at that high school at that particular time that day. But I accepted it, and it was challenging in terms of work, race relations. But it became a very positive experience also because I knew who I was. So calling me names did not bother me. I didn't try to respond or get angry. I just knew who I was and continued to act like that. And I think it proved to be very beneficial.
So Dr. Sermon Boyd went on to work as a counselor and to become, at the time of the interview, the first and only African-American woman to serve as superintendent in Jones County, North Carolina, at those schools. Her story actually helped spark the school integration and desegregation oral history project that I mentioned earlier. Her story, in conjunction with others, helped spark that project that's currently underway at the archives. So the importance of multiculturalism in education continues today in both the public schools and in homeschooling situations. Mary Fitzwin created Heart for Homeschool Ministries to ensure her kids and others could see people like them in positions of prominence. Listen as she discusses her efforts to ensure diversity and equity in homeschooling.
Children of color weren't seeing any people of color as speakers at the annual conference for North Carolinians for Home Education. I was a speaker. That doesn't really count. Do you know what I'm saying? Because I'm also part of NCHE. And, you know, my kids get to hear me speak at home, whether they want to or not. But we weren't just targeting people of color as speakers, but we were very intentional to bring them in so that when we held conferences or workshops, and they were always for families, the families would see that, yes, there are other homeschool families of color, because again, if you only pay attention to what you see going on in Winston-Salem, which is where they have their conference, you have a very different idea of what homeschooling looks like. There are a lot of, homeschool families of many, many ethnicities. And so that was the intention for Heart for Homeschool. So
Despite education's clear importance across the interviews, for several women, pursuing education meant facing gender discrimination. Candace Ray always wanted to be a banker, but she faced barriers to achieving her goals as a result of misguided perceptions about her gender. It wasn't just traditional. It wasn't traditional for a woman who got married in high school to go to college, let alone want success in the boardroom. Candace Ray chronicles her story in the oral history, but for now, hear about how she attempted to overcome obstacles on her way to a degree.
Working my way up in the banking industry, I moved from switchboard operator to customer service to manager. And eventually I was city administrator over all the banks. And I was quite young, but each step of the way, I would beg for the opportunity to go to college. The men under me were paid to not only go to college, but get masters. And then all the men that were managers were paid to complete their college degree. And each time I asked, I was told, you're in your childbearing years. I kid you not. So I couldn't get the college degree and I couldn't afford it. I mean, I was making so little, in the banking industry. So eventually, when I was over all the bank offices, I found out that one of the men under me was gone for the week. And I'm like, where's he at? Well, they're paying for him to get a master's. Then I found out that some of the other men under me were making $20,000 more a year, even though I had 17 years in banking. So I talked to the president of the bank, and he said it was because I had a community college degree and they had a 4-year degree, which was crushing because I couldn't afford a 4-year degree. And my parents were not, my parents were wonderful parents, but they supported women not really having careers, but I had to out of a necessity. My mom always said the men should be managers because they got families. But so as it turned out, that really didn't sit well with me, that it just didn't sit well.
However, what underlies Ray's story, as well as the stories from other women we interviewed, were efforts to persevere in the face of discrimination. These efforts built upon the women who came before and with women in the future in mind. In fact, former Chief Justice Sherry Beasley speaks on the recency of many of these historic breakthroughs.
I'm only the 4th woman. This court is celebrating its 200th anniversary this year. Only the 4th woman to serve as Chief Justice of this court. And so the history is modern history. And only the 2nd African-American woman and the 8th African-American, it's all recent history. Of all those folks, only one is deceased. That's recent history.
It certainly is recent history. And another interesting theme throughout the interviews came through reflections on the differences between men and women. For example, District Court Judge Catherine Overby reflects on the responsibilities of women who have careers and families. These responsibilities go right down to very minute wardrobe concerns.
Or whatever the distinction is in the husband and wife, there's just extra on women. And so, as a prosecutor, as a judge, coming to court every day, coming to the workplace every day, and then getting the call from daycare that your child needs stitches, or that you've got this activity this afternoon or whatever. And so you're pulled in different directions, whereas men don't have that constantly. I don't see that. I just had a conversation this morning with a female assistant DA about wearing skirt suits in front of jurors because that's what they want to see women in. And it's still there. And how unfortunate it is, as we're both wearing pants today, but how, getting called little lady by another elected official who happens to be a man, and dealing with that. So I think gender does, it's still play. I mean, we're not equal yet.
And another place where women in North Carolina fought to overcome these inequalities most clearly is with the government. As for the first contract lobbyist and healthcare specialist, Janice Ramquist shares part of her story.
I was the first woman to work as a contract lobbyist. There were very few women lobbyists, and all of them worked for a law firm or the Nurses Association or so forth. So I was competing with male lobbyists, and just the general belief that men can do better. I mean, it was so pervasive that men would be more successful than women. most of the lobbyists for business. I'm, working for the underdog. And so I would play the men's game. I've stepped out of being a woman and, went for the jugular. And times I'd lobby against 19 insurance medical group. And then there was me trying to get a managed care and get a provision in what I was pushing for. And then Governor Easley took it as his own bill. And I got the provisions in that I wanted to increase the scope of practice of optometrists and nurse anesthetists.
Another place where women push back against stereotypes is in college sports. Of course, this being North Carolina and March with the tournament around the corner, you didn't think we'd have a presentation and not mention the influence of women in college sports, did you? Take a listen to longtime Elon professor, Dr. Janie Brown, as she explains why she calls herself a Title IX complainer.
I'm a Title IX complainer still to this day. And I know the athletic people well, and once in a while, I think they don't want to see me coming because they know I'm going to say something. And I'll just give you a couple of examples. I've just expressed this out there. You enter the men's games and they check your purse. You enter the women's games, don't check your purse. So the first women's game this year, I went in and there was a man standing there doing the tickets. And I said, well, I guess it just doesn't matter to you all if I get shot at a women's game. You just don't want me to get shot at a men's game. And he said, I beg your pardon. And I said, why don't you check purses for the women's games? And he looked at me and he said, it should be checked. I also found out that the women have men students. They have to qualify academically, but they come and practice with the women's team. When they send into Title IX to report the number of participants they have to the NCAA, they count those men students as a woman student because they practice with the women's teams. And it's the big things, they have to offer scholarships and everything. And that's the good thing that they do offer that. But it's just the little things that just irritate a person like me because I see that. And sometimes I feel like I can complain. They can't fire me. They still want my money. And many coaches would not feel comfortable complaining about some of those things.
Similarly, and much like Judge Catherine Overby from earlier, Dolores Todd talks about organizing the original ACC tournament, but all the men cared about was her outfit.
I remember a couple of my early days in the ACC. We would always have a coaches meeting before we built our new office. We didn't have room. So we'd have a coaches meeting the night before the championship started. So the first swim meet was at NC State. And so we had our meeting at NC State, but the meeting was also on Valentine's Day. So I had a red suit on. I didn't think anything of it. So as the coaches are leaving, the Carolina coach comes up to me and says, Dee, next year the championships is at Carolina. Are you going to wear blue? I was like, what? You mean to tell me all you have to look at is what color I have on? And you know what? I found out they all did that.
Still, despite the trials on and off the court, our women are notable women. And don't just take our word for it. Instead, listen again to former Chief Justice Beasley.
Because being a woman is different from being a man. Our experiences are different in so many areas. And I'm sure in all the folks that you're talking to, these are women who have blazed trails. These are women who have, by their determination, have changed the course of their lives and the lives of people around them and changed the course of history. And they dared to do it.
Indeed. We spoke to over 25 women and collected more than 40 interview hours. So you can imagine there are quite a number of conclusions we can draw. This is just a taste of the project. We've only just scratched the surface of what these women have said about how they shaped, changed, and molded North Carolina. And I invite you to explore the project yourself and see what interesting and groundbreaking stories you find. And I want to say also that the job isn't done. As we've shown, women continue to make remarkable changes in the state, and we're interested in preserving those stories. So if you are, or you know a notable woman and would like to nominate yourself or them for the project, we would love to hear from you. And at this point, I think we'll open up to questions.
Thank you so much, John and Annabeth. This was really fantastic. We have one question starting out. What is the most difficult part that you found so far in gathering these oral histories from women?
Well, so the thrust of the project happened before I joined on. I'll say that. So this was a 2019. The major point of it was to be part of that collecting thing that I was talking about earlier that ran through November of 2020. But it's finding, I think, people people don't want to nominate themselves. And I think that's probably the trickiest part. Once we sit down at the end, I can't tell you how many times I've heard in this project and in others, well, I didn't realize I had so much to share. And everybody's got a story. And I think that's the point there. It's just that I don't know all of the stories. And so I have to rely on people to come forward sometimes or make connections for me. And that is probably the most difficult part.
We have a great follow-up question to that. How can people nominate someone or themselves? How do they get in touch with you guys? What's that process like?
Perfect. So that's the next slide. Contact information is available here, but also on our website, we have the form is still up and available there through the oral history unit of the, let's see, how does it work? It's definitely archives, what is it? Archives.dncr.gov? Yeah, right. If you Google state archives and oral history, you'll get to our page where you'll find a form that you can nominate people for. Or you could just send me an email and that'll take care of that too.
And we've dropped the direct link to the website in the chat, so feel free to go there and check out as well. Do we have any
Perfect, thank you.
questions from our in-person audience? Okay, Jerry, we have some from folks online, right?
Yes, we do. Let's see, what's the end of the banker's story? Did she get her degree and did the bank pay for it?
If I recall correctly, she did, but I don't think the bank paid for it. Do you remember?
I don't remember that being.
Yeah. Yeah. And when I interviewed her, she was no longer in banking, but in real estate. So that might give you another indication of how that turned out for her. Yeah, I would encourage you to listen to that interview. It's got a lot of twists and turns.
Let's see, also from our own Nancy Pennington, do you interview people online and in person? Do you prefer in person? Why?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the short answer is yes, we do both. We have the facility to interview people. It looks much like Zoom. It's not called Zoom, but it looks much like Zoom. And we preserve those stories just the same. Personally, I think I prefer in person because in a one-on-one setting, across the table from each other, there's a lot that's said with body language that the camera doesn't often pick up. And that, you can really get a sense of if somebody's uncomfortable with a line of questioning, or if somebody really wants to get to talk about something and you're not asking that question particularly, then you can kind of see that and adjust accordingly. So that is what I prefer to do.
Along that, do you go into an interview with set questions and try to get the answers to those, or do you kind of just go with the flow of the interview?
Once again, the answer is yes. That's the short answer. The long answer, of course, is it's a blend. I really discourage people from just kind of sitting down, unless you're really good at interviewing, just kind of sitting down and saying, let's just talk. That gets a little bit disjointed oftentimes. So I like to, especially if it's your first time, have a set of questions. But at the same time, don't be so focused on the questions that you're missing opportunities for diversion, for follow-ups. So an example of that, I have one that off the top of my head comes from our school integration that I'll reference here. And I talked to this individual before the interview and got to finding out that he's currently a minister, and he previously went through school in a segregated situation, but still I wanted his story for context, and Dr. Dudley Flood recommended him to me, and anything Dr. Dudley Flood says, I'm going to do. So, okay, I talked to him, and then in the middle of the interview, he starts talking about how he's a school administrator working on Pender counties and getting those integrated. If I was too stuck on my list of questions, I wouldn't have heard that, and I wouldn't have asked for more about that. And so it really depends on the interview whether or not I stick to the questions or just kind of stick to the broad themes of the project that we're talking about, because sometimes things like that happen, and you just throw the script out and see what comes up. So that's the long answer to that question.
With it being oral histories, I immediately think of, well, you're getting audio recordings of these interviews, but you mentioned setting up a camera a while ago. So are you doing these as basically video presentations? So you've got the audio and the video, and you can use them as you need, but you've got that video representation of the interview?
Yeah. So the majority of our interviews are just audio. All of them for this project are just audio. I would say probably of the, what is it, 150 interviews now? It's 250 interviews now. Sorry. Approximately 25 to 50 have video. And just for boring storage problems that we have, concerns, I should say, that's why we don't have everything in video. But we do have, in some instances, both. And so we keep the footage raw in both the video and the audio. And so if you go and listen to it, you'll listen to it the whole way through as if we took it in one take, basically, unless there's a specific note for a particular interview. But we have, the majority is simply audio, but we are trending towards more video as we go.
Are all of these interviews manually transcribed?
No, no transcription. I chuckle because with the advent of AI, that's becoming more and more accessible, because we could just feed it through a machine and then have somebody spot check the transcripts. Before AI really started taking off, within even the last year or two, before that, it had to be done by hand. And each hour's worth of interview took approximately 4 to 8 to way more hours, depending on how good the person was transcribing. So we definitely have a backlog on that front. Happy to listen to anybody who wants to volunteer for that. But we're working through the backlog, and now that I said the AI came into it, it's helping immensely, because it does the first draft and then we can just edit it as opposed to doing it from scratch. So that's pushing things along, but I would not say a majority of our interviews are transcribed as of yet.
Final question I have in the chat is, Annabeth mentioned she worked previously as an intern before her new role. What was her experience as an intern and how it prepared her for her new role now? Also, do you, John, often take on interns, and what is the internship program like?
Well, I'll answer my part, and then I'll let Annabeth answer her part. I take at least one intern every semester, including the summer semesters. So currently I have 2. This summer I'll have another 2. And I've been doing that ever since. Partly because they're young and eager, and helping is I need the help, but also because I think it's good for people to get experience, especially in this kind of, it's a niche field. There's not a lot of oral historians in the world. Well, I guess in the United States, I won't speak for the world, but the skills are so translatable. And so I think it's essential to kind of help the next generation of historian people trying to get into this field. So I kind of take it as my personal mission to help at least one a semester. There's an internship program through the state archives. I can get the link for that as well. And you can look at the different opportunities we have at the archives, because it's not just oral history. There's processing and different special collections, military collections, all sorts of work to be done, and opportunities to be had. So that's the program and my involvement in that. And I'll let Annabeth talk about hers.
Yeah, so I was the podcast intern last summer, and I had an excellent experience, obviously, which is why I'm back now, working for the archives. But my background is in journalism, in radio journalism specifically, and so being through the internship, I was able to, really work on those radio skills in terms of the podcast and learning how you can take historical research and historical documents and really dig in and then translate that in a way that gets people involved and makes them want to do research themselves. So kind of demystifying that process and making sure that, the stories that we're telling are accurate and, accessible to people is really what I was able to work on during my internship. I really don't think there's anything or very few things more powerful than the human voice. And so being able to give voice to written records and then also to hear, from people like the women in the She Changed the World collection, give those, a new platform is definitely something that, was an excellent opportunity. And so I really enjoyed my time at the archives and I still enjoy it now.
Stacy has just put a link to the internship program at the archives in the chat.
Thank you.
I have one more coming through the chat. What are some of your future subject goals?
That's another good question. Currently, we're kind of trying to make sure we put our focus on the desegregation and integration oral history project, and then the American Indian Heritage Commission oral history project that I mentioned previously. So that's going to be the goals for the near future. However, we are discussing trying to give voice to LGBTQ communities and expand in that part of the archives. I think what you can see the through line is in my collecting efforts is that I'm trying to give voice in places where often the archives has not had, not just this archives, but in general, has not given voice to. I mean, we all have a lot of reference to, rich white men, but we're trying to get into more than just that. Not to say that there's not any, that there's not a place for that. There is. I just want to make it as inclusive as possible, make it as big as possible, because that's what I think an archive should be. Big tent, everybody's in. That's my plan. And I will say that these oral histories, I don't know if we mentioned that they're part of the digital collection in the archives. And then at the same time, if that's just a sampling, we'll be getting more of our oral histories available through the digital collection. But if you go to our catalog and search oral histories, you can find a reference to almost all, if not all, of the oral histories we've done, and then reach out to me to listen to them, or the search room at the State Archives, and they'll get you a copy. But like I said, for She Changed the World, all of these interviews are available for streaming through the digital collection.
All right. Just want to say one more time, thank you so much, John and Annabeth, for sharing this incredible project with us and helping us to celebrate women's history and all of y'all's hard work and continued hard work. We can't wait to see what all you do with the project.
All right. Thank you.
And thank you to all those of you who joined us online and in person today. Special shout out to Upper Elementary at Davidson Green School. We're so glad you were able to join us online today. We hope that all of you have a wonderful day and continue celebrating Women's History Month.